Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website at arh.noaa.gov. Get any updates to the forecast there. You can check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. We have our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can follow us both on Facebook and on Twitter. Starting off, we'll take a quick look at the advisories that we have out for the state. We have 4 of them, all of which are freezing rain advisories and all of which are around the Norton Sound area. The first 2 are the southern ones in the Yukon Delta and lower Yukon Valley. Those freezing rain advisories are valid from 6 p.m. this evening until noon tomorrow. Then the other 2 are in effect for the southern part of the Seward Peninsula coastline. And then we also have for the eastern Norton Sound and Nulato Hills, freezing rain advisories again. And those 2 are active from midnight tonight until 6 p.m. tomorrow. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we'll kind of get a view of what's causing those freezing rain advisories. We start off south of the Aleutian Range. We have some warmer air coming up from the south. You can see with all that cloud cover out ahead of that system, moving in over the southwest part of the state. Watch this again, we can see the leading branch of that starting to move up, making its way all the way now into the Norton Sound area and up towards the Seward Peninsula. As we move out into the eastern part of the state, a lot of clear skies out over the Gulf right now, but we still have some lingering cloud cover out over the Panhandle, and you can see from the south that's starting to clear up, keeping a lot of the showery precipitation more to the northern part of the Panhandle. And finally, we'll look over the mainland part of the state. Cloud cover throughout much of the morning hours, but then as we key this loop up again and watch, we can see a lot of the skies diminishing throughout much of the southern part of the state, but a lot of that lower cloud cover lingering throughout much of the northern interior and along the Arctic coastline. Takes us to our weather for the remainder of the day. We have those isolated showers continuing for the northern parts of the Panhandle, extending out towards Yakutat, and then some isolated showers also around the Prince William Sound area, but high pressure keeping a lot of the precipitation away from western or eastern parts of the interior up into the Brooks Range, with just some isolated snow showers up along the Arctic coast. But as we move out to the west, we can see our main system with a lot of that southerly flow bringing up a lot of precipitation with that warmer air over much of the western part of the state. Start off in the southern part of the Alaska Peninsula, a lot of that rain making its way there and starting to move into Kodiak as well. And then as we move up into the YK Delta area, Bristol Bay area, we do have a little bit colder conditions starting off with some snow, but transitioning over to rain as we move later into the day and evening. And with some of that warmer air overriding some of the warmer or colder air at the surface, we are going to see the potential for that freezing rain to develop as we move into the evening hours. Up along the west coast of the state, we do have some isolated snow showers continuing through the Bering Strait down towards Gamble, then up in the Point Hope area. Down for the remainder of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, northerly flow out there, cold enough to have some isolated snow showers way out in the western Aleutian Islands. Then as we move into tonight, we're going to continue that colder air in the western part with some snow way out west, but back to rain with continued southerly flow heading out towards the Alaska Peninsula. Rain throughout all of that area, covering all of Kodiak Island, throughout the night and into Bristol Bay. Mix of precipitation in the rest of the YK Delta area, but this mix is going to start to move up throughout the night, especially in those evening hours, and as we saw by midnight, going to extend out over the Norton Sound area, providing the possibility for some freezing rain in those areas. But further to the north, cold enough to keep snow all the way around the Kotzebue Sound area, out in the Brooks Range and up along the western parts of the Arctic coast. In the northeastern parts of the Brooks Range, going to have enough wind down there to have some blowing snow conditions, but much of the rest of the interior should be dry with the effects of this high pressure in from Canada. As we move down into the south central, we are going to have the high pressure keeping a lot of moisture towards the surface, which is going to allow for the development of some fog overnight all along the Cook Inlet area and then out in the Copper River Basin as well, and some isolated snow showers possible for the eastern parts of the Kenai Peninsula. Down in the southeast, going to see enough instability there to keep some isolated rain showers throughout the area, and a little bit colder closer to Haines. Going to see some of that mix in with some snow overnight tonight. As we move into Friday, high pressure starting to extend now over the Panhandle, going to keep void of any kind of precipitation out there, but isolated rain showers continuing along the North Gulf Coast with areas of fog, especially in the morning hours for the Copper River Basin out into the Susitna Valley as well. But high pressure enough to keep a lot of precipitation out of the central and eastern parts of the interior, and then that includes now the Brooks Range and all along the Arctic coast. Some cloud cover remaining up there, but not going to see a whole lot of precipitation. But along the west coast, continued southerly flow now, rain throughout all of the Bristol Bay area, up through much of the YK Delta, but still in the Yukon Delta, especially in the morning hours, going to see the potential for some of that freezing rain, and then around the Norton Sound as well. But as we get further inland and further north towards the Kotzebue Sound, going to see snow in those locations all the way up towards Point Hope and down through the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island area. Snow expected there, and stronger winds going to lead to some blowing snow conditions. Down in the Bering Sea, northerly flow, rain-snow mix for the Central Aleutian Islands and for the Pribilof Islands. And then as we get further out to the west, a chance for some snow showers continuing for the western Aleutian Islands on Friday. Moving into Saturday, even colder now for the Central Aleutian Islands, should be all snow, and that includes the western Aleutian Islands as well. But even on Saturday, we still have warm southerly flow, weakening now, but still enough to bring rain throughout the Bristol Bay area down into the Aleutian Islands, and the possibility for the mixed precipitation continues for the YK Delta and Norton Sound areas. Just a slighter chance of freezing rain at this time on Saturday, and then snow further to the north extending in from the Galena area up through the Kotzebue Sound area and up the Arctic coastline towards around Barrow. Still out in the eastern part of the interior, extending up to the eastern Arctic coastline, should be void of precipitation, but now we have enough of that southerly flow bringing in precipitation throughout much of the south central to include the Copper River Basin and eastern parts of the Alaska Range. You're going to see that mostly snow. Rain largely along the coastline, including the Kenai Peninsula, and starting to make its way towards Yakutat, but high pressure lingering throughout the day on Saturday should keep the Panhandle void of most precipitation. For our temperatures this afternoon, largely in the 40s for the Panhandle, a little bit warmer as we get further to the south, 46 for Ketchikan, 45 for Yakutat, and then along the Arctic coastline around 40, or Gulf coastline around 40 degrees there, dropping down into the 20s as we move inland. Anchorage and Kenai both at 28 this afternoon, 25 for Talkeetna, 24 for Glen Allen, and 35 for Kodiak. And that takes us up into the interior, where along the eastern portions we're seeing temperatures in the teens. Colder there at Arctic Village, only 3 degrees, but warmer as we get further to the west. Bettles 28 degrees, 25 through the pass, and then up along the Arctic coastline in the teens for most locations. Kaktovik seeing 21 degrees, and then down along the western coast we're seeing 6 at Kivalina, and then 13 for Kotzebue. Down in the Norton Sound area we are seeing Nome at 17, in the 20s on the southern side of the Norton Sound. And as we move into the rest of the YK Delta down by the Kuskokwim, we are going to see temperatures right around freezing this afternoon, and then right around freezing as well for the Bristol Bay area. Warmer as we get into the Alaska Peninsula, 42 for Cold Bay, 45 for Sandpoint, and then moving out into the Aleutian Islands. Temperatures dropping as we get further to the west until we get down to freezing this afternoon for 32 degrees at Shemya. For the Pribilofs, St. Paul at 34, St. George at 35 this afternoon. And our low temperatures tonight are going to be pretty much the same throughout all of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands locations. And as we move out into the Bristol Bay area, going to see temperatures right around the same as well, in the mid to lower 30s there. Colder as we get inland. Iliamna down to 31 tonight, down around 30 degrees for the Kuskokwim Delta, and then around Norton Sound southern side, we're going to see down into the mid-20s. Northern side, Nome at 17 degrees, Gamble down to 7. Below zero in western parts of the Kotzebue Sound, and below zero as well along the Arctic coastline, with Barrow itself getting down to -4. Warmer as we get out west, AKwx 6 degrees, and then single digits for many locations in the eastern part of the interior. 0 degrees for Arctic Village, Fort Yukon 6 degrees, Northway all the way down to -3 degrees, and in the teens as we get further off to the west. Down in the south central, mid-teens for most locations, a little bit warmer along the coastline, staying around freezing there. Homer down to 32, Seward down to 31, 33 for Cordova. Colder as we get into the Copper River Basin, down to 5 degrees for Glen Allen, 38 expected low tonight for Kodiak. And then down in the southeast part of the state, seeing temperatures drop right around freezing, not quite there unless you're at Yakutat, right at freezing. 33 degrees for Skagway, Haines, and Juneau, and then warmer as we get further to the south. Ketchikan only getting down to 37 degrees tonight. For our highs tomorrow, temperatures are going to jump back up into the 40s in the Panhandle. Warmest further to the south, colder as we get further to the north. Yakutat 41 degrees for a high tomorrow. 40 degrees along the Gulf Coast, down into Kodiak at 44 degrees expected high. Mid-30s as we move a little bit more inland. Talkeetna 36 degrees for a high. And then into the 20s in the central and western parts of the interior, into the teens as we get further off to the east. Arctic Village only getting up to 11 degrees and getting above freezing, but staying in the single digits along the Arctic coastline. And as we move into the Kotzebue Sound area, a wide variation, colder out west in the teens, getting up to around 30 as we get further off towards the east. Norton Sound area right about freezing, with Gamble getting up to 13 degrees for a high tomorrow. Mid to upper 30s, many locations in the YK Delta, 42 for Antioch, in the lower 40s as we get into the Bristol Bay area, and in the mid 40s in the Alaska Peninsula, dropping down to only getting up to around 34 degrees way out west, and St. Paul getting up to 37 degrees for tomorrow. Switching it up, we'll take a look at our flying weather. Widespread MVFR conditions throughout much of the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, with some IFR conditions mixed in, especially along the coastline. And as we move up the west coast, going to see continued MVFR conditions. Southerly flow bringing those MVFR conditions into much of the south central Kodiak Island area as well. And underneath the high pressure, we're expecting to see some stratus and the potential for some fog. So seeing some MVFR conditions underneath the high extending down into the Panhandle as well. Taking a look at our passes, we are expecting AKwx to start off VFR but drop down to MVFR through the day, as well as Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill will both start off VFR and drop all the way down to IFR for tomorrow. And then Rainy Pass starting off VFR, dropping down to MVFR. Windy will be VFR throughout the day. Isabel Pass should also remain VFR for tomorrow. Mentasta VFR conditions expected. Tenita will start off VFR, drop down to marginal as we move throughout the day. Portage will also drop down to MVFR from VFR for tomorrow. And Chilkoot and White will both remain MVFR throughout the day tomorrow, but there are expected some breaks in some of that stratus that could jump up to VFR or drop down to IFR depending on how bad the stratus and fog move in. For freezing levels tomorrow, you can see all the warmer air coming in throughout much of the Gulf, keeping that freezing line right along the coastline and in the northern parts of the Panhandle. But as we look out west, we can really see the warmer air starting to override that freezing line, giving us the potential for the rain to develop above us but drop down into those below freezing conditions, giving us that freezing rain. Then we can see the surface freezing line drop out to the west out over the Bering Sea. For our icing tomorrow, as expected, with our main bulk of the precipitation out along the west coast above 10,000 feet for the eastern Aleutian Islands, extending out into the Bristol Bay area, dropping down to above 9,000 feet. So get up into the YK Delta, Norton Sound areas, and then up by the Kotzebue Sound area, extending up into the western parts of the Brooks Range between 8,000 and 12,000 there. Now for our flight level winds, we'll start off with the jet stream south of the Aleutian Islands. We have out of a westerly direction the strongest part of the jet, 170 knots, but shouldn't be much of a factor for us until we start curving back up towards the Gulf of Alaska, 145 knots there, dropping down to 120 as we exit out over the Panhandle out of a northwesterly direction. We have another arc of the jet coming in out over the Bristol Bay area of a southerly direction, 75 knots, turning northwesterly as it exits out over Canada. And then a westerly component of the jet, 70 knots there, going just off the coastline of the Arctic coast. Dropping us down to 9,000 feet. Flow around our high pressure out west or east, going to be pretty light, 15 to 20 knots there. Strongest winds out over the Gulf, 45 to 50 knots out of a southeasterly direction, moving in over the state, dropping down to 20 to 30 knots there. Strongest right along the western part of the state, picking back up to 40 knots out of a westerly direction off the Arctic coastline. As we move out over the Bering Sea, in the eastern parts we have flow around 30 knots out of a southerly direction, dropping down though and becoming more northerly as we get out over the west, picking up to as high as 20 knots out of a westerly direction over the western Aleutian Islands. And then down to 3,000 feet, we have flow way out west out of that southerly direction, but northerly flow along the western Aleutian Islands, 25 to 30 knots there. And then as we move out over the eastern part of the Bering Sea, southerly flow, 25 to 30 knots, going up the west coast of the state. But now we have that strongest core of winds, 55 knots, going out over Kodiak and through the western and central part of the state, only dropping down to around 45 knots, and then down to around 30 as we get along the Arctic coastline. But flow around our high pressure pretty low, 10 to 15, until we get out over the Gulf of Alaska, around 25 knots out of a southeasterly direction there. And as expected, with those stronger winds moving out over Kodiak Island into parts of south central, we're going to see a lot of turbulence there below 6,000 feet. And that's going to move with those stronger winds up the western part of the state into the Kotzebue Sound area below 5,000 feet there. And we do have some stronger winds off the Bering Strait, and then by St. Lawrence Island, going to see some turbulence there, again below 5,000 feet. And our stronger winds going to interact with the terrain that we have out by the central Aleutian Islands below 4,000 feet expected there. And then we'll be back shortly with your marine forecast.
God of love versus the God of war.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plow Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We always hear about the planets aligning, but we have something really special happening this week that we get to share with the red planet Mars.
That's right, James. Mars, Venus, and Earth will be in just the right position that we'll get to see a Mars-Venus scoochie. And if you're on Mars, you would see a Venus-Earth scoochie.
What are we talking about? Let's show you. As many of you know, the planets orbit the Sun in nested ellipses. Mercury being the closest planet to the Sun, then Venus, then Earth, and then Mars.
As we travel around the Sun, we're all traveling at different speeds. The astronomer Johannes Kepler noticed that planets closer to the Sun travel faster than those further away. It takes Mercury only 88 Earth days to orbit the Sun, and Venus takes 225 days to orbit the Sun.
Earth takes approximately 365 days, or 1 year, to orbit the Sun. Meanwhile, Mars takes almost 2 years to orbit the Sun. When we view the solar system from above, the planets look like runners on a racetrack, with each planet in a different lane.
On February 20th and 21st, Venus, Earth, and Mars will be arranged in such a way that we on Earth will see what most astronomers call a conjunction, or what we stargazers call a scoochie. Venus and Mars will be next to each other in the sky just after sunset.
And if we had an observer on Mars, like the Curiosity Mars rover for example, it would see Venus and Earth next to each other in the sky just before sunrise.
Hey James, let's do something on Stargazers we've never done before. Let's view the sky from Earth, then take our viewers to Mars and view the same conjunction from there.
Sounds like a splendiferous idea, Dean. Let's go.
Okay, we have our skies set up for any night this week just after sunset facing west. Your attention will be immediately drawn to two bright, non-twinkling lights. The brighter of the two is our sister planet Venus, named after the Roman goddess of beauty and love.
The dimmer and redder of the two is the red planet Mars, named after the Roman god of war. Mars will be up and to the right of Venus. However, as the week passes, you'll see Venus getting closer and closer to Mars. Then, on February the 20th, a slender waxing crescent moon joins Venus and Mars for an exquisite partnering in the evening twilight.
Then, on February 21st, Mars and Venus reach their closest appearance to each other in the sky. And this is the day when Martians will be able to see an equally close conjunction of Venus and Earth.
Since there are no Martians,
So you say,
and no humans on Mars,
yet
we do have robot explorers on the surface of Mars. One of the most recent visitors to the red planet is the Curiosity rover, also known as the Mars Science Laboratory.
So, get your skyboards ready as we go where no Stargazer episode has gone before. We'll take a trip to Mars and check out the same conjunction from the Curiosity rover's perspective.
Okay, we've got our skies set up for just before sunrise here at Curiosity's landing site, near Gale Crater on Mars. We're about 4.5 degrees south of the Martian equator and about 137 degrees east longitude. We have our time set to just before the Martian sunrise, 1645 Universal Time, or more commonly 11:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
So, if we aim the Curiosity rover's camera to just south of east, we would see our home planet Earth snuggling up with our sister planet Venus.
And if you were lucky enough to have your telescope with you, you'd see a gibbous Earth with a tiny gibbous pinpoint of light next to it. That's none other than our moon. Now, how neat is that?
Such wonderful things to see on our world and throughout the solar system. You just have to remember to keep looking up.
Welcome back. We'll start off with a quick look at our sea surface temperatures. What we really want to focus on here is right around the Pribilof Islands. We do have temperatures around 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. And this comes into play as we look at our ice edge now. About 30 nautical miles to the northwest of St. Paul, we do have the ice edge. And with that northeasterly flow, we're expecting this to start pushing more to the south and west, which will give the opportunity for some of that ice to make its way closer to St. Paul. But with those warmer sea surface temps, even if some stray ice makes it into the area, could melt pretty quickly. But for a more detailed forecast about how this ice is expected to move, you can visit our website, arh.noaa.gov, and you can click on the link to the ice page from there. As we look a little bit further off to the East Bristol Bay area with that warm southerly flow, expecting this ice to continue to diminish. And as we look out in the Cook Inlet area, a southerly flow there as well, expecting some of that ice to diminish as well. For the remainder of the marine forecast, we'll start off in the southeast. Weak flow in the inside waters, but southeasterly flow 20 to 25 knots out in the Gulf. Seas up to as high as 6 feet there on Friday. And then for Saturday, we have flow becoming all southeasterly, 20 knots in the inside waters, down to 15 near Juneau, and 20 to 30 knots as we get out into the northern parts of the Gulf. Seas as high as 13 feet out there, only around 4 feet in the inside waters. For the south central flow, primarily easterly out in the Gulf, up to as high as 50 knots, seeing those storm force winds right around the Barren Islands. And as we move out into Cook Inlet, down through Shelikof Strait, northeasterly flow there, getting up to storm force at 50 knots, again on the western part of the Barrens, and then down into Shelikof Strait. Seas as high as 20 feet highest through Shelikof Strait, and then down to as low as 4 feet in Prince William Sound on Friday. In Saturday, dropping down, but still pretty strong southeasterly, 45 knots out there south of Cordova. And then as we get towards the Barren Islands, up to as high as 35 knots there, becoming southerly as we get closer to Kodiak Island. And then in our inside waters, Cook Inlet up to as high as 30 knots there, 30 knots west of the Barren Islands. Moving into the Alaska Peninsula, primarily an easterly flow, strongest closer to Kodiak Island out of the east at 40 knots there. Seas as high as 15 feet there, dropping down 5 to 7 feet in the Bering side. Still an easterly flow, 25 to 30 knots. into Saturday, becoming more southerly, 20 to 30 knots, strongest near Bristol Bay. Down for the Aleutian Islands, a northerly flow, weakest out east, picking up to as high as 30 knots as we get out towards the central Aleutian Islands, and then dropping down to around 10 knots out over the western Aleutian Islands. On Saturday, becoming more northwesterly, around 20 knots out west, picking up to as high as 30 knots as we get out over the central Aleutian Islands, then dropping down 15 to 20 knots way out east. Along the west coast of the state, right along the coastline, southeasterly flow 25 to 30 knots. So get further off into the open water, going to see more northerly flow around 30 knots, dropping down to around 15 knots as we get closer to the Pribilof Islands. Then on Saturday, flow remaining pretty similar, out of a more southerly direction, becoming more northerly as we get further to the north and as we push out towards western parts of St. Matthew Island, 30 knots there, and then westerly flow around 15 knots closer to the Pribilofs. Along the Arctic coastline, northwesterly flow around 15 knots all the way along the Arctic coast, and as we get off to the west, northerly flow around 20 knots there. Then on Saturday, becoming more northeasterly, 20 to 25 knots, and becoming due east towards the Beaufort Sea, around 15 knots there on Saturday. Quick recap for the state: isolated rain showers expected for the southeast part of the state. Colder towards Haines, going to see some snow mixing in there. Fog for the Copper River Basin, extending down into the Cook Inlet area and up into the Susitna Valley, and some isolated snow showers possible for the eastern parts of the Kenai Peninsula, but warmer southerly air coming in, bringing in a lot of rain to Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay areas, starting to push in to the YK Delta area, and going to see the potential for some freezing rain starting to push further to the north, extending up after midnight into places around the eastern and northern side of the Norton Sound, but snow in the Kotzebue Sound and up along the Arctic coastline into the Brooks Range as well, with some blowing snow conditions possible in northeastern parts of the Brooks Range. And the northerly flow bringing in some snow way out to the western parts of the Aleutian Islands. Moving into Friday, continued flow with the potential for some of that freezing rain to continue in the Yukon Delta and up into the Norton Sound area, so be advised for some of those conditions, and then snow up in the Kotzebue Sound area. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.